Hello and welcome to part 2 of this tutorial on adding a simple AI to your first-person shooter template. In this tutorial, we're going to go from where we left off in part 1, which is we've got an AI spawner that drops these shiny metal enemies in that chase us around. And we're going to go from that to this. Let me start this up, bring it over. We'll first of all increase the fire rate of the first-person weapon. We'll actually make it automatic, so as long as you hold down the fire button, it will shoot. And we'll also make it so that the projectiles will take the enemies out, and they will eventually disappear after a small explosion. So let's get right into it. What we're going to cover is we're going to talk about the project setup, which is pretty straightforward. That's just picking up where we left off with part 1 of this tutorial. I'll put a link to that in the description. We're going to modify the first-person projectile, modify the first-person character for the automatic firing, and finally we'll do some modifications to the enemy character. In fact, that's where the bulk of the work that we're going to do lies. So let's get right into it. First of all, let's modify the first-person projectile. That is let me back up here. That is found in the first-person BP blueprints folder, first-person projectile. We need to modify the collision component, and we're just going to click on that and then find the collision component in the details section. And if that is not opened up, open it up. It should be set to custom. And what we need to do is we need to change the setting for pawn so that it doesn't ignore pawns, so that it overlaps pawns. Click compile, click save, and we are done with the first person projectile. Next thing we need to modify is the first person character so that it will fire as long as you hold down the fire button. So find the spot in the blueprint where the input action fire is and drag that off a little bit further so that we can insert some code here. We're going to hit Alt left mouse button on the pressed wire and remove that. And what we're going to do with that is, I'm going over to my notes here, just give me a second. We're going to set a timer so that it will repeat. So go off the pressed wire, pull off the pressed node, and we're going to set a timer by event. We should invent or add the custom event. So let's right click and add a custom event, and we're going to change the name of that to fire, which is probably bad practice because it matches the input action fire, but it'll be fine. Drag the fire wire into the event and change the time to 0.1 seconds and check the looping option. In the fire event, we're simply going to have that connect to the existing wire so that it starts firing. We also need to connect the wire after we set the timer, otherwise there will be a delay, and we want the projectile to spawn right away as soon as we press the fire button. So having made that mistake before, make sure you don't do that, and that is hook up. Let me get this here so it's more visual. Hook this up to the fire event right off. So let's compile and save that and then click play. And observe that once we press fire, it doesn't stop. And the reason for that is when the fire button is released, we need to clear this timer. So on the released action, we're going to pull off of that and type in clear timer by function name. And even though we are clearing a fire custom event, the terminology custom event and function name is the same. So type in fire, which is the name of the function name / custom event that we are clearing. And now you'll find that when we release the fire button, we stop shooting, which is great. Next thing we have to do is set up the interaction with the enemy character. So that should be found over in the blueprints folder that we created last time, and that's the BP enemy character. We're going to open that up. This is the code that we wrote last time to have the enemy find us, And this is the chase player event, which, by the way, ultimately we are going to clear that when we get done. So let's find ourselves a nice open area to start writing some code. All right, so the capsule component for the enemy character needs to be modified as well. We're going to click on capsule component and go over to the collision for that, and you'll see that it's set to pawn. Open that up and change that from pawn to custom, and that will allow us to make these changes here. And all we need to do is make sure that we have overlap with the projectile, like so. And that's it for that modification. Then there's several ways to add events related to components. I find it easiest to go up to the component in the component list, right click, and select add event, and we want to add on component begin overlap. What we also need to do is add a variable to keep track of whether or not this particular instance of an enemy character is alive. Now there's some discussion that we could have as to whether or not we should keep track of whether or not it's dead or not, but I like to go with is alive because it's just going to be one less node that we have to write. And anyway, let's just go ahead and click on add variable, and we're going to call this is alive and make sure it's a Boolean, which it is. I'm going to click compile, which then allows us to set the default value of that to true. Let's drag the is alive variable out. I'm going to get it. You can do that, by the way, by holding down the control key and dragging that out to do the get action on that. So we're going to make a branch, hold down the B key and left click to make a branch, and we will check the value of is alive. And if we are alive, we're going to continue. The idea is that we're going to set this to false in just a second so that we will only do this once. Let's drag off the other actor and cast that to a first-person projectile to ensure that that is the thing that actually hit us. And if that is true, we then have this first-person projectile object that we can work with. And I'm going to drag off of that. Actually, I'm going to right-click on that, and I'm going to promote that to a variable, and I'm going to name it projectile. The reason is we're going to need that later down the line in this blueprint, and I just find it easiest to have the variable available rather than dragging way over like that, and it kind of muddies up the blueprint. All right, so now that we have a reference to the projectile, I'm going to drag off the is alive, holding down the Alt key, and set that to false, so that next time, or if another projectile hits us, this will be false, and we won't do any additional code. All right, we won't do this multiple times. So we have to clear this timer so that we stop chasing the player, because that would be awkward if it was laying on the ground and crawling towards us. It would be kind of zombie-like, I guess. So we're going to drag off of here, clear timer by function name, and make sure that we copy that exactly. Chase player is what I called that. So for function name, chase player. And then we're going to enable the physics on the mesh. And to do that, I'm going to drag the mesh out like so, and drag off of the mesh, set simulate physics. I want to set that to true. And then we're also going to set collision enabled. The reason we do that, by the way, is so that the mesh doesn't fall through the floor, which with the physics enabled, which I've seen before, and it looks a little bit weird. For the new type of collision, we'll just go with physics only, like so. And then we're going to drag this projectile out, hold down the control key to get it, and we want to get the world location of the collision component, and you'll see why in just a second. This is going to be the next thing we do, is have an explosion appear where the collision component collided with our enemy character. So we're going to drag off of here, set collision enabled, pull that all the way over. I'll probably clean this up in a second. And we're going to spawn actor from class. Hopefully, when you originally made this project, you brought in the starter content, and we're going to use the BP blueprint explosion. If you just type explosion here, you'll find that blueprint effect explosion. So let me just jump back over to the map editor or the main editor screen. In case you didn't have this, you can bring in the starter content later. You do that by going to the Add New button in the content browser, add feature or content pack, and then under content packs, you can go to starter content, add that to the project. Only do that if you haven't done it, didn't originally add the starter content. All right, so with that out of the way, we have to figure out where we're going to spawn this explosion at. And this accepts a transform, which has a location, rotation, and scale. Since we don't want to use the rotation and scale of anything to adjust the size of the blueprint, or sorry, the actor that we spawn, we're going to right click on the transform and split it so that we can just affect the location of it. Now, this is awesome because we can also change the scale of the explosion. If we want a larger or smaller explosion, we can adjust that here as well. I'm not going to do that, but it is something that you can do. Next thing we want to do is we want to add an impulse from where the projectile hit the character, so the character kind of moves a little bit based on where the projectile hit it. I'm going to do that by pulling out the projectile again and holding down the control key, getting that. I want to get the velocity of the projectile, and I want to get the location of it. So we're going to get actor location. There we go. And we're going to need those because we're going to pull out the mesh again, and we're going to add impulse at location. Like so. And that is going to require us to add an impulse, which is we'll use the velocity for that. We're actually going to multiply the velocity by 10. So I'm going to drag off of that and do a vector times float and change that to 10. And this is just a number that you could adjust to control how much effect the projectile has with the mesh. You can increase this or decrease it based on your own findings when you play this. I'm going to hook up the actor location, and then we're going to come over here to the code after the impulse location. We want to destroy the projectile. So drag off, get the projectile, and drag off of that, destroy, spelled correctly, destroy actor, and that will destroy the projectile. And then we're going to add a delay for 3 seconds. And finally, after those 3 seconds, we will destroy actor, and that's going to be ourself, and that will cause the mesh to go away. So I'm going to actually add a piece of code between here and here in just a second, but I want to check this and make sure it works. So I'm going to click compile and save, click play, and hopefully we got everything right. It looks like I hit the enemy, he fell down, and they go away. All right, sorry, I got a little carried away. That gets kind of fun. All right, so what I'd like to do is add a small explosion when the character is removed from the level. To do that, we're going to go to the first person character. Oh, I'm sorry, to the mannequin and character mesh, and open up the skeletal mesh for the mannequin. In the skeletal tree, I'm going to click here on the head just to help me find that. We're going to find the head bone, right click on it, and select add socket, which it named head socket, which is great. We're going to use that so that we have a location of where we want to spawn the emitter when we're going to remove the actor from the level. So I'm going to save that, come back here to the BP enemy character, hold down the Alt key, left click between the completed and destroy actor, and I'm going to once again drag the mesh in like so. And off of the mesh, I'm going to type in get socket location, and in socket name, I want to type in head socket like so. Head socket spelled correctly, and that will give me the location of that socket that we just added. I'm going to drag off of that delay, and this time, instead of spawning an actor with an explosion, I'm just going to spawn an emitter like so at location. And the location that I'm going to spawn the emitter is at that where that head socket is, and the emitter that I'm going to spawn is a particle system for the explosion. Make sure auto destroys on, by the way, and hook that up. And that's it. So let's compile, save, play again, and let's see here. They fall down, and poof, they go away. Great. So that covers it. I'm going to put some screenshots up at the end here so that you can confirm that you got everything correct. If it's not working for you, if I've left something out or you have any questions, please do ask down in the comments below. I'll be glad to answer them as soon as I can. Thanks for watching.